I posted a video only a few days ago about the bombing of Gaza, and now the situation is already gravely worse. As a consequence of a total siege,
no food, no water.
Gaza is no less than a horror show.
أنقذوا غزة أرجوكم أنقذوا غزة إنها تموت إنها تموت إنها تموت هنا الأطفال والشيوخ والكبار لا أستطيع أن أقدم لهم أنا أونروا لو أنا مديرة هذا اللواء لا أستطيع أن أقدم لهم أي شيء.
Shortly after the announcement that Israel was blocking food and water, genocide scholar Martin Shaw, author of What is Genocide, wrote, "Cutting off power, water, and fuel until Israeli hostages are freed turns Gaza's entire population into hostages. To all intents and purposes, Israel has abandoned serious discrimination for collective punishment. If the threats are carried out, it will be deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, at least in part, as the Genocide Convention puts it." The UN Relief and Works Agency, the unique UN agency designated solely to Palestinian refugees, is, in the words of Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini,
on the verge of collapse. We have reports in our log base, for example, where hundreds of people are just sharing one toilet.
The UN Relief Works Agency's X account is a waking nightmare. In 1 week, Israel killed more Palestinians than during the entire 50-day 2014 war, in which 2,200 people were killed, including over 500 children. Again, Israel dwarfed that in a single week. And then came the evacuation. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant ordered over 1 million residents in Gaza's north to relocate south or be killed.
Those who want to save their life, please go south.
Gaza's north contains all of Gaza City and the largest hospital in all of the Gaza Strip, Al-Shifa. 4 hospitals in the northern Gaza Strip are no longer functioning, and another 21 have been ordered by Israel to evacuate. The doctors refuse to evacuate, saying that the evacuation will cause the death of many patients. The UN warned today that the fuel for the generators in the hospitals will run out, which will endanger the lives of thousands of hospitalized patients. It's absolutely impossible to evacuate the hospital. There is nowhere in Gaza that can accept the number of patients in our intensive care unit or neonatal intensive care unit, or even the operating rooms. If someone doesn't die from the bombardment, then he'll die from the lack of medical service. The New York Times also reports that while fleeing, an Israeli airstrike struck a convoy of vehicles trying to flee the north along a main highway, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, killing 70 people and injuring 200. In my last video, I reported how, despite telling Gazans to leave, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also said that he will operate forcefully everywhere. And due to Israel enforcing a total blockade, Gazans are unable to flee to Israel, so many sought Egypt. But on Tuesday afternoon, the Israeli Air Force repeatedly bombed their only way out at Rafah crossing, effectively trapping them inside. Despite the evacuation order to separate Hamas from the civilian population, Israel is still bombing the south, which is crammed with hundreds of thousands of fleeing refugees. And as I reported days ago, last Tuesday, the IDF spokesperson said the emphasis is on damage rather than on precision. Writing in the Yedioth Aharonot newspaper, reservist Major General and defense analyst Giora Island wrote in plain language the benefits of intentionally causing a humanitarian crisis. In a piece titled, "This is not revenge, it's either us or them." The state of Israel has no choice but to make Gaza a place that is temporarily or permanently impossible to live in. Every building will be a military target. Further, not to be content with stopping the flow of electricity, diesel, and water to Gaza, but to gradually attack targets that provide these essential needs, and if necessary, also to block with fire any vehicle passage from the city of Rafah to the north. Creating a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a necessary means to achieve the goal. Despite what Israel's ambassador for the United Kingdom claimed in an interview with Sky News.
What's the view on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza this morning?
There is no humanitarian crisis because...
There isn't?
There is no. Israel is in charge of the safety of the Israelis Hamas is in charge of the safety of the Palestinians.
If you're new to the channel, Israel's own leading expert on international law, Professor Yoram Dinstein, disagrees. Writing in his The International Law of Belligerent Occupation, the proposition that the Israeli occupation in the Gaza Strip is over is not the prevalent opinion, and the present writer cannot possibly accept it. Human Rights Watch puts it even more directly. Whether the Israeli army is inside Gaza or redeployed around its periphery and restricting entrance and exit, it remains in control. The ambassador's interview then took a troubling turn.
We've been showing pictures this morning that would illustrate that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Are you a mother? If your children would have been executed in front of your eyes, would you expect your government to think about those Nazis committing those crimes and to say, wait a second, first of all, we need to protect the enemy?
Indeed, Israel's policies have been accompanied by some very alarming and little reported on rhetoric, not least of which being from Israel's own President Isaac Herzog.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
I sent these remarks to genocide scholar Mark Levine of the University of Southampton, author of Genocide in the Age of the Nation-State. His response was informative. It reinforces what I was saying, which is this becomes the Israeli government alibi for treating everybody in Gaza as if they are Hamas. Mass murder is thereby legitimated. Levine was referring to a letter he had sent to The Guardian in which he wrote, "Genocide. The word has to be uttered, though it cannot be done with carelessness or flippancy. Israel is on the cusp of committing genocide in Gaza. And in stating that word, with full cognizance and dread of its meaning, I find myself having to say what many people may be thinking, but no one, at least not in the high offices of Western states, are willing to enunciate or act upon." Ordinary Israelis' horrifying trauma this last week at what was visited upon them in the genocidal slaughter and hostage-taking of their loved ones has to find some emotional outlet. When the country's defense minister a few days ago vowed to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth, that understandably resonated with a great many of them. But to destroy Hamas cannot be achieved without obliterating Gaza, and obliterating Gaza cannot be done without either at the very least ethnically cleansing its inhabitants, at this given moment impossible given Egyptian refusal of a safe corridor through the Rafah crossing, or failing that, obliterating them. Whether intended or not, every Hamas killer and every other Gazan have become one and the same thing for the Netanyahu regime. Genocides, more often than not, are triggered when a state, usually supported by a significant element of its population, reaches an existential moment of crisis in which its very raison d'etre is thrown into jeopardy. Levine cited Netanyahu.
The fate of our country is laid on the table.
Additionally, I'll cite Defense Minister Yoav Gallant as well here.
This is a war on the existence of Israel.
Levine continues, "We are precisely in such a scenario now in which a state leadership in its extremis reaches out for its long tucked-away plans of last resort." What will a plan of last resort look like? There's not just a physical war taking place on the ground. There's an information war playing out on platforms around the world. On this channel, I prioritize researching all sides rather than accepting the mainstream narrative. One of my favorite tools I've been using to do this is Ground News. The app and website process thousands of sources from all around the world so you can compare coverage and get deeper insights into every news story. This story piqued my attention. Israel to allow Egypt to deliver limited quantities of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It'll show you the bias breakdown from different outlets on all sides of the aisle. Looking closer, I noticed two distinct narratives, one focusing on aid as a solution while the other highlights it's Biden's request. It's also interesting to see that more than 80% of these articles are coming from high factuality sources, which tells me this story is less sensationalized. I think what Ground News is doing is really important, and I encourage you to check it out. Go to ground.news/GDF. Subscribe through my link for as little as $1 a month or 30% off unlimited access, and support my channel in the meantime. Veteran investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, citing his Israeli contacts, painted a harrowing picture. With the starved-out civilian population forced to leave, the Israeli operational plan calls for the Air Force to destroy the remaining structures in Gaza City and elsewhere in the north. Gaza City will be no more. Afterwards, he says, Israel will begin dropping American-made 5,000-pound bunker buster bombs, also known as JDAMs. An improvised version of the bomb, made famous as the Moab, or mother of all bombs, was dropped in Afghanistan by the United States in 2017. Hirsch's Israeli insider source compared the policy to the free fire zones of the Vietnam War, in which, following a directive by MACV Commander General William Westmoreland, free strike zones should be configured to eliminate populated areas except those in accepted VC bases. If northern Gaza were to go the way of the free fire zone, in which civilians were said to be cleared and only the enemy remained,
kill anyone in there. They rounded up these people like cattle and put them in concentration camps. And if we see them, we kill them.
Everyone, men, women, and children, could be considered the enemy. You could not be held responsible for firing on innocent civilians, since by definition there were none there. In the words of infantryman Robert J. Graham, in an article interestingly enough about the American failure in Vietnam, published in Military Affairs. The only problem with this notion during the Vietnam War and now is that the Americans didn't only bomb so-called free fire zones. As a State Department memo put it, saturation bombing by artillery and airstrikes, for example, is an accepted tactic, and there is probably no province where this tactic has not been widely employed. Which was echoed by Bibi's threat to operate forcefully everywhere, and the continued bombing of the South, the Israeli stated destination for the million Palestinians it forced to flee south. I can't think of a more apt or less crude description. At that point, you're just shooting fish in a barrel.
Lay out your case.
That's Raz Siegel, Associate Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies and Endowed Professor in the Study of Modern Genocide at Stockton University.
We have to understand that the UN Convention requires that we see special intent, declaring a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off water, food, fuel, stating that we're fighting human animals and we will react accordingly. We will eliminate everything. We know that Israeli army spokesperson Daniel Hagari, for example, said explicitly the emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy. Really, I have to say, if this is not special intent to commit genocide, I really don't know what is.
Indeed, genocidal rhetoric appears to be permeating Israeli society as we speak. Scouring Hebrew language sources, we can find numerous examples. Danny Danon, a Likud Knesset member and former UN ambassador to Israel from 2015 to 2020, told an Israeli radio show, "Let's clarify, there was a large Gazan public that took part in the riots and the pogrom against the Jewish people. It wasn't just Hamas terrorists, it was also a public. Also, in terms of the abductees, some of the abductees are in the hands of private citizens. I can't say that all the Gazan public is involved, but I can't say how much it is in percentages. I usually stand behind what I say, and I say it clearly. The Gazan public took part in the murder, the massacre, the kidnapping, and even today, the Gazan public, not terrorist organizations, have Israeli abductees in their hands." Yossi Cohen, former head of the Mossad, or the equivalent to the CIA or MI6, justified the siege of Gaza by stating, "Civilians from Gaza, civilians, not just Hamas terrorists, took part in the abominable murders of children, babies, and women." The author of this Times of Israel article, Amy Spiro, also commented that many Gazans, seemingly civilians, were seen in videos from the October 7th assault rushing through the border fence, taking part in looting and other activities. There have been some reports that they too joined in on murderous attacks on Israelis, though Jerusalem has not said so officially thus far. Rabbi Eli Sedan founded and heads the B'nai David Pre-Military Academy, which has thousands of graduates, many of who serve in the Israeli military. In an interview with Channel 14, Sedan said, "These are not innocent citizens from crime. These are citizens who provide the basis for crime." Other members of the Knesset have expressed similar rhetoric, or perhaps even more extreme, such as the Knesset member who called for nuking Gaza, and another who called for the so-called Second Nakba, referring to the mass expulsion of Palestinians from what is now the State of Israel. Right now, one target, Nakba, a Nakba that dwarfs the Nakba of 48. Except this wouldn't be the second one. According to Israel's own estimates, the Six-Day War of June 1967 produced as many as 250,000 refugees, on top of the 750,000 from the first one. In fact, the vast majority of the population of Gaza, something that's not said often enough, are descendants of refugees expelled from what is now the State of Israel. So, People who have been crammed into Gaza aren't even originally from there. They were, and currently are, the victims of a long history of forced transfer, which, according to genocide scholar Mark Levine, always in my book are ipso facto genocidal.